Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. My name is Ramiro Funez. I'm a member of Fight Imperialism, Stand Together. I'm also a member of Partido Libertad y Refundación of Honduras. We're part of the Honduran resistance movement. So I'm representing both groups. I'm representing the working class, immigrants, everyone. So we're here representing everyone. So before I talk a little bit about the Caravan, I just want to talk about the child migrant crisis. Why do we care about it? Why has it entered our discussion? Earlier this summer, there were some photos that were leaked online of students and families being held in cages. And these photos were released on social media, and they weren't released by U.S. government agencies. They were released by people within those institutions and establishments that discovered the conditions in which the children and the families were living in and decided to take photos of them and leak them. So it wasn't a government leaked photo. They were leaked by people who were acting against the will of the government in that sense. So earlier in the summer, you had a lot of publicity and a lot of information surrounding the children in the cages, but a lot of the coverage that basically chronicled the whole migrant crisis began around 2011 and 2012 when the numbers became noticeable. CNN, Fox News, and the rest of the bourgeois media began very later on in their analysis of the migrant crisis, and they treated it as something that was such a surprise. It was a surprise that so many people were coming to the border, and these children had no families, and the commentators really treated it as if it were an isolated event. But as we know, the child migrant crisis has been going on since the Monroe Doctrine, since the U.S. imperialist foreign policies in Latin America and around the world. So as soon as we saw all of these different things going on. I spoke with Lucy, with Teresa, with different people here with the group, and we really decided to do something about it. We couldn't just sit on the sidelines and not respond. And that's why before talking about the Caravan, I just want to really make sure I thank the May 1st Coalition, which did a really great job in the May 1st Coalition did a very great job in linking this immigrant struggle with the worker struggle, which is something that they're always great and amazing at. I want to thank the May 1st Coalition, Pastors for Peace, which helped us organize the bus drive. I want to thank everyone in the party who was so generous as to make donations, and everyone here. I think everyone here in this room, has really played a substantial role, even just being here today. So we couldn't have accomplished what we did with the Caravan without everyone's help. So to the central theme of our Caravan, what made our Caravan and what made our initiative different from the rest? One thing that distinguished us from other, caravans or movements of the similar nature is that we were all about solidarity, and we were all about linking the struggles of people around the world together and in a response to this crisis. So we weren't just fighting for immigrant rights, we were fighting for workers' rights, for LGBTQ rights, for everything, anyone who's oppressed and part of the working class. And that's what made our Caravan a little different from many others. We had a great diversity, as Pablo mentioned. We had brothers and sisters who were indigenous, white, black, Latino, everything. We represented a broad spectrum of the working class that we are, proudly. And the central theme of our Caravan was really linking all these struggles together, linking the struggle in the border with the struggle of the racist police brutality in Ferguson, with the racist, imperialist, colonialist policies in Gaza, and everything else that's going on around the world is interconnected, because when you have the U.S. government denying refugee status for these people while at the same time giving Israel an empty check, we need to put those struggles together, and they're not going to make those connections for us. So this is what this caravan is really all about. Solidarity caravan, solidarity, learning what solidarity means, and learning, we each have our own causes, but really at the end of the day, piecing them together into one larger struggle. Because if I stay in the immigrant struggle, I'm only going to know about that, and I'm going to stay divided from everything else. So that was the central theme of our caravan, is solidarity, building solidarity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our experiences briefly in each city. We arrived. This was about 2 weeks ago. It's been some time now. So it seems like a year ago. It's been some time, but. The first Saturday that we departed, we arrived in Philadelphia. We were greeted by an excellent organization named Juntos and some other folks who were working in the Philly branch of the party, and just really amazing people who greeted us with a huge event. We were able to fundraise a lot of money, and we spoke to a lot of families who were really going through the same struggles and issues that many of us are going through here. Food insecurity, the threat of deportation, and so many other issues. Following our trip from Philadelphia, we were tremendously greeted by the FMLN, the Frente Farabundo Martí para la Liberación Nacional of El Salvador. So I want to thank them as well. The FMLN really had such a great greeting for us in Washington, D.C. They housed us. We had one compañera who, showed us pictures with her daughter and Fidel, so that was great. We had comrades who were there who were talking about their experiences as guerrillas in the Salvadoran, the revolution against the imperialists. So that was great. Following D.C., we traveled to Durham, North Carolina, where we had a really great event with some of the folks out there with the party and FIS and other groups as well. And we visited these very special commons, these grounds that had been were not only indigenous lands that were exploited and taken over by the colonialists, but were also used as breeding grounds for slavery and for slave labor. And we had a really great event and discussion on, North Carolina and the kind of like the slavery and the oppression that has gone on there, and how so many issues have overlapped, how so many people's blood is in that soil. You have migrants being killed, slaves who were killed there. You had the indigenous peoples who were slaughtered. So we were just being on those grounds is very, it was sad, but it was also very powerful, knowing that there's so much energy there from all the oppressed peoples around the world, both through time and space. So that was great. North Carolina, from there we traveled to Atlanta, where we were greeted again with another great event. They were very mobilized, very militant organization that did amazing, tremendous things, and really bridging the gap that people, new migrants have when they arrive to Atlanta with, finding jobs and having their rights and whatnot. So we were greeted there with great, amazing Mexican food, which is really good. I think it rivals the Mexican food that was in Mexico and Texas, which is funny. But it was really great Mexican food. And, the people there, we had at that program in Atlanta, we had, some of the most marginalized people into the pockets of society, the lumpen proletariat, and some people who were excluded from the formal economy and whatnot. And they stood up with so much energy and power and saying, I don't have papers and I don't care, I don't care. And that was such a great thing, seeing that that we had people who were standing up and were fighting for their rights as human beings, and we're saying, yeah, so what? We don't have papers. We don't acknowledge that. That's not that's not going to define who we are. We're not criminals. So I think that was a very great experience, seeing that in Atlanta. Atlanta is a very mobilized and very energetic city with the migrant struggle. From there, we visited Jackson, Mississippi, which was personally one of my favorite stops. We were there in commemoration of Chokwe Lumumba, our great comrade, who always fought for the working class. And we linked the struggle the immigrant struggle and the working class struggle and the struggle for racial equality all together at this event. And one of the things that Chokwei's son Anton he was mentioning is that his father would always say, it doesn't matter where you came from, if you're pink, purple, blue, neon, whatever color you are, if you're a working, hardworking person, part of the working class, then you're on my side. And that's something that really stuck with me from that visit. So that was really great, just showing our solidarity with the folks in Jackson, Mississippi, and fighting against the slaveocracy. So that was great. From there, we visited Houston. We were greeted once again with another great event. We were just in time for the decorations of Dia de los Muertos. So, just driving down Houston. And as soon as we got into Texas, you see this really great Chicano, Mexican art murals and just very powerful revolutionary artwork. Very powerful stuff. We went into San Antonio at the Southwest Workers Union, where we were greeted again with tremendous hospitality. We had one thing that really stood in my mind is we had one compañera who was Nahual, and she was part of the indigenous peoples who are native to that land, and that's something. I had some comrades with me on the Caravan that really got to really enlighten me with paying respects to the indigenous peoples of those lands, because when you're talking about areas like Texas and Mississippi and all of these different areas, you're talking about some of the most exploited, colonized places historically, right? And I'm not saying New York isn't on that list, but this is really the grunt of imperialist slaveocracy, of capitalism, of free market capitalism. And it really, I learned something along the way that I'll never forget, and that is to pay homage to the indigenous peoples of whatever land that we're on. So I just would like to do that now, actually. So I'd like to pay homage to the indigenous peoples of this land here. So that's something that we experienced. And in San Antonio, we had one comrade who, she was speaking about her experiences as being, part of the Nahual peoples, and how we have to build solidarity with not just all native peoples around the world, but also all oppressed peoples. That was really eye-opening. And finally, we arrived on the border towns and Laredo, and we also visited across the border into Nuevo Laredo, and we visited Brownsville as well, which is right across from Matamoros. And overall, one thing I will say is, there are misconceptions about the South. They say, everyone in the South is conservative, everyone is a member of the Tea Party and it's right wing. You can't deny the class struggle that's in the South. The class struggle is very out in the open. The proletariat and the bourgeoisie, it's very noticeable from the beginning who's on what side, and people will point you out for that. If you're Mexican American and you're like, I don't support immigrant rights, then you're going to get called out on it, because you're being a traitor to us as an oppressed working class. And that's one thing that I notice is, the class antagonisms are undeniable in the South, and it really opened my mind. Another thing that stuck out to me was we were visiting these areas called Las Colonias, and Las Colonias are sectors of Rio Grande Valley, basically, the most oppressed working class neighborhoods that hadn't been remodeled in terms of infrastructure after the U.S. Occupation, of those lands. So you have places that don't have running water. You have places that don't have paved streets, as Pablo mentioned. You have outhouses. You have people showering outside, and you literally feel like you're in a very oppressed, what we would call a quote third world country, an oppressed country, and you have a lot of, there's a buffer between the border and a few hundred miles out into Texas, which is one of the checkpoints, right? So what happens is that there's a margin between the border and the checkpoint where a lot of undocumented immigrants remain there, because if they go farther up north, they're going to hit a checkpoint and they're going to get deported back. So, one of the things I want to make clear is that it's not like once you get into this country, all is clear and you're safe. If you hit a checkpoint, they're going to deport you. So what happens, and immediately when I saw that geographically, that space between the border and the checkpoint, which pretty much forms Las Colonias and these oppressed neighborhoods, I immediately thought of Gaza. I immediately thought of the Israeli settlement and the occupation of Palestine, and the way that these areas were like just in horrible condition, and no running water, no indoor plumbing. This exists in the United States, the so-called most advanced country in the world. So we have our own very own Gaza in the United States, and that's Las Colonias, that's the Rio Grande Valley. I visited one local establishment in Laredo, and I spoke to one of the workers there. She was a Honduran woman and was pretty much stuck in Laredo. There are people who are stuck in certain cities because they're trying to make enough money to leave and eventually go either to Los Angeles or New York or anywhere else around the country. So there are people who are stuck. There is a wall. There's an invisible wall that creates a kind of Gaza-like living situation in Texas. It's a whole other world. It's a whole other nation. And just really reiterating that this country has so many nations that are all oppressed and going through their own process. So that was, that's a little bit about our caravan and just visiting some of the different areas. What I want to do is kind of connect the child migrant crisis and this whole migration crisis to the different struggles, and I have some written down that I took notes about, and these are just I felt throughout the caravan, just speaking with different people that presented different angles that were definitely worth mentioning. You have the child migrant crisis is an immigrant rights struggle. It is a worker struggle. It is an indigenous people struggle. It is an anti-imperialist struggle. It is an anti-racist struggle. It is a women's struggle, and it is an LGBTQ struggle, and many more that I'm excluding. And just touching a little bit on each of these, the child migrant crisis is a worker struggle because most of the people who are coming into the borders they're not, the wealthy 1% bourgeoisie, the owner of Telmex or the owner of, the Honduran bananeros or all the international bourgeoisie. Borders don't exist for the bourgeoisie. It's only for the working class that they exist. Because as we know, the bourgeoisie can travel freely to any country. They can do whatever they want, invest. They have no borders, but it's really the working class who are surrounded by borders everywhere, not just in Mexico. They're surrounded by borders everywhere. So this migrant crisis and the immigrant struggle is most definitely a worker struggle. It is also an indigenous people struggle because the so-called United States government is claiming these lands as their own. But as we know, all of these lands were pillaged and colonized by the slaveocracy and by the government. Many years ago, and the very lands we're on now do not belong to the U.S. government, and why does the U.S. government have a say in deciding who can and cannot pass the borders if it's not even their land to begin with, So, that's one thing to really keep in mind is who are we, who is the U.S. government to say, this person can cross and they can't. It's indigenous peoples who really have the rights to these lands. The child migrant crisis, the immigration struggle is also an anti-imperialist struggle. Because without imperialism, you wouldn't have migration, right? If it wasn't for CAFTA, if it wasn't for NAFTA, if it wasn't for these free trade agreements that were embellished with these beautiful titles, these bourgeois free trade and so these economic policies were imposed on our peoples. We don't want to leave beautiful tropical lands to come to Queens or Brooklyn, and basically, this is an anti-imperialist struggle. This is an anti-imperialist struggle. This is an anti-imperialist struggle just because the mere fact that these policies, economic policies and political policies, are imposed in our governments and imposed in our lands, and they create the conditions for people to leave to begin with. And during the 1950s and 60s and 70s, you had Guatemalan dictator Enrique Rios Montt, right? He was a pro-U.S. dictator slaughtered, thousands of indigenous activists and socialists who were fighting for socialism in Guatemala. And there was a mass exodus of immigrants there. During the 80s in El Salvador, you had the heroic FMLN fighting against the U.S. imperialists and the government that was working with the U.S. That created the conditions for mass migration. That created MS-13, which is one of the largest gangs right now, which they call them Los Hijos de la Guerra, the sons of the war, because they were created by the Civil War, which was created by U.S. imperialism, right? With the Honduran and Garifuna migration, you had the 2009 coup d'etat that removed democratically elected President Jose Manuel Zelaya Rosales, right? Because he was fighting for socialism and fighting for the working class. But of course, the U.S. didn't like that, didn't fall in line with the Washington Consensus, so they implemented, their own little lapdog governments, which created the conditions for migration, right? So anti-imperialism creates migration, and that is why the immigrant struggle is the anti-imperialist struggle. We need to link the two. They're not mutually exclusive. Right. The migrant struggle is also the women's struggle, because as Pablo mentioned, you have so many women who are crossing these borders with their children, 5, 6 children, and they're really the ones who are being the most oppressed. But one thing I noticed, and just going, especially in Texas, is that the women are really at the forefront, the vanguard of this revolutionary movement. And without the women's help, we wouldn't be anywhere. So, we need to really make sure that's emphasized, because it's really the women who have been oppressed and directly attacked as mothers and, as wives and so forth. And we really need to link the women's struggle with the immigrant struggle, because they go hand in hand. The Garifuna women who are being detained, they have the tracking devices, the shackles on their ankles, and they're not allowed to go anywhere. And they're also at risk of being deported pretty soon, which is very sad. And finally, the migrant struggle, immigration struggle, is also the LGBTQ struggle, because there are many LGBTQ members of the LGBTQ community who are undocumented and who are crossing the border as well. But guess what? They don't have, since the state doesn't recognize their love or their partnership or their marriage, then they're the first ones to be deported back. So that's really something that I noticed as well in Texas, that just hearing some people tell me stories, about queer men or queer women who, because their matrimony isn't recognized by the state and the institutions, that they're the first ones who are pretty much sent back because they have no one technically, but they do. So the migrant struggle is also the LGBTQ struggle, and all of these struggles, they're all connected, right? They all form the whole. We need to not just mention what we're struggling through, but also who's creating the conditions for the struggle, right? And I just want to say it very plainly and clearly: it's capitalist imperialism. Capitalism and imperialism are the reasons for all these different struggles to begin with, and we need to attack, we need to agitate against the U.S. government and the institutions and their friends on Wall Street who are creating all these different things. When you look online and you check like the NASDAQ and the Dow, and you see all these numbers and abbreviations and letters, these are all people's lives that are being traded, and that still exists. That's not a game. They treat it as a game, but these are people's lives. These are some 3 letters with some numbers next to it may be, stock in a Central American country that they just sold, to another company, and they're going to privatize it, and all these things have meanings, and we need to fight against imperialism, fight against capitalism, if we want workers' rights, if we want LGBTQ rights, if we want women's rights, if we want indigenous people's rights, and we need to create solidarity among ourselves against the superstructure of gross, horrible, racist capitalism and imperialism. It's not we shouldn't aim to necessarily convince the people at the top to help us, because they're not going to do it. Their very livelihood depends on reproducing these oppressive conditions. You know, that's how capitalism survives. It has to reproduce itself. Imperialism has to keep invading countries. Therefore, people have to keep coming here. It's a cycle. You know, it keeps. If we ask them nicely, they're not going to stop. That's why we have to fight them and defeat them. So, you know, that was our caravan. That's what our caravan was about. And overall, you know, I know this was a really great initiative that, you know, got a lot of attention, and it was really great. But just because we came back to New York and we're here, and, you know, it's Thursday night, it's Halloween tomorrow, we shouldn't forget about what's going on the border. There's, you know, there's a lot of things going on the border. There's, like I said, there's Gaza-like conditions in Las Colonias in the Rio Grande Valley. That we can't forget about, and that's, you know, something that people have told us on our visit. You know, don't forget about us. You know, fight for us, keep fighting for us in New York, unite the struggles around the country, and you know, I just want to thank you guys for having us, and that's pretty much it. So thank you.